clarify again, will anyone be, any of the judges be giving time signals? If not, I have my own timer, but I was just wondering.
Kashfi's the chair. Kashfi, were you going to do time signals?
Yeah, I can't have my camera on because otherwise my connection will be slow.
Okay. Monica, are you able to do time signals?
Yeah, I was explaining but my mic was off.
Okay, great.
Okay, so
yeah, it's been a while since I've done Extemp, so you don't want me doing time signals.
It's totally fine.
Cool.
So I will try to be like as clear as possible. I'll just give you the basic 7-minute countdown.
Yes.
Do 1 minute. I'll show you a minute, 30 seconds, 15, and then the last 5.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, cool. Whenever you're ready.
I'll also be running my own timer as well, so.
Yes.
With COVID-19, it has overwhelmed hospitals, sent sick patients home who weren't on the brink of death, and also increased the number of medical marijuana licenses. In fact, in the state of Massachusetts, it's increased this number by 245% in the month of April alone when compared to the previous month of March, according to an article from the Boston Globe on April 23rd. Now, this is due to the fact that more people now have access to different doctor visits. Not only that, but each doctor, in order to meet numerous patients, pretty much limited every appointment to around 10 to 15 minutes per patient, meaning that more and more people were able to get licenses. This has brought up the question of telehealth, as other kinds of doctors are also meeting their patients online due to social distancing. But actually, contrary to popular belief, telehealth, or known as telemedicine, has been around in the United States for some time now. In fact, in 2016, according to the US Department of Social Health, it has been found that around 60% of US hospitals used telehealth in that year alone, meaning that we've been using this for almost 4 years now. This leads us to today's question, which is telehealth the future? And the answer is most definite yes, due to the fact that people need it. We can look at this through 3 key areas of analysis. By first, looking at the counter arguments as to why perhaps telehealth won't be the future and saying that they will. Second, by looking at accessibility to numerous people before finally taking a look at the costs and how those will be reduced drastically. First and foremost, let's take a look at what people say about telehealth not being the future of medicine. We say that numerous individuals have cited 2 key examples. The first being Medicare. We see that numerous individuals have talked about, since, for example, lots of telehealth appointments have happened online, numerous individuals have found it very difficult to be reimbursed afterwards. This is due to the fact that programs, federally owned programs like Medicare, do not actually reimburse patients, and telehealth doesn't fall under that. However, with the status quo, with the rise in the use of telehealth, not only just during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that more and more people will use it, and Medicare will be forced to include it under its plans. But secondly, people talk about how national states, people can't move across borders. With the current laws for doctors right now, doctors must practice where the state in which the patient is located. So let's say that a patient is located in Massachusetts, for example, and wants to visit a specialist doctor in California over a call. This doctor cannot do that, unfortunately, and unless they have a license within Massachusetts itself. This has been cited as a huge issue. However, we see that doctors are more willing to actually apply for different types of licenses in order to appeal to more patients and ultimately get more success. Now that we've taken a look at the counter arguments, let's now take a look at accessibility. Accessibility is a huge plus when it comes to telemedicine/telehealth. We see that numerous individuals, for various reasons, absolutely need telemedicine in order to gain those appointments, to have the health that they need in order to survive. We see that when it comes to care to patients, 2 different top examples come up for why patients can't make it to the hospital. One is transportation issues. A lot of people do not either have the supporting transportation or simply are trying to save the environment by not trying to transport themselves to an appointment. we see that transportation issues is a big issue, especially for low-income areas, and so telehealth will be especially big within those areas. But secondly, those who are too sick or too old to travel long distances has been cited as well. We see that within the senior citizen community, old people are notoriously known for having numerous emergency rooms visits and also hospitalizations. This is especially true within nursing homes as well. We will see that with telemedicine and telehealth, the number of hospitalizations and emergency room visits will decrease drastically, as minor problems can possibly be solved with an appointment and through diagnosis by a doctor, rather than trying to worry because they are already sick/old. Additionally, patients who have diseases that can be transferred, or if they have very vulnerable immune systems. So patients, for example, with cystic fibrosis have a tendency to attract numerous bacteria, which could eventually kill them, as their immune system is already compromised as of now. And so we see that with accessibility, it would increase, thus allowing more people to actually use telehealth in the long term. But third, let's look at the costs. Now, it is notorious that within America, healthcare is very, very expensive. In fact, according to the Peterson Foundation, in November of 2019, it was found that around each person costs $11,000 for healthcare. On the flip side, we see that when it comes to 2025, it is estimated that each person will have to pay around $18,000 just for healthcare alone. We see that numerous individuals within the United States are looking for cheaper ways to get the healthcare that they absolutely need. Telehealth is one of those huge cost-reducing services. In fact, it was cited by the U.S. Department of Social Services and Health in 2019 that it cost around $14 million to support telehealth services. And this is only 0.01 of all healthcare costs within the United States alone. But now that we're taking a look at the United States, let's look at the costs in other nations such as the EU. The EU is found to be also a very popular place where telehealth is growing within the nation. We see that also the costs are very much reduced, but also the access as well. If you, for example, you need a specialist, as you have like a rare disease, for instance, you would need to visit a doctor in a different place. Since the EU laws are more relaxed, an individual can visit a doctor virtually that lives in a different country, allowing for better healthcare access overall. We see that the EU government is also promoting this in the status quo as well. And so when we take a look at today's question, is telehealth the future or telemedicine the future? The answer is most definite yes, because people need it. We saw it through three key areas of analysis. By first taking a look at how the counter arguments don't work. Second, by looking at accessibility and how more people will need it and use it, before finally taking a look at the costs and how people will have to turn to telehealth in order to meet their own healthcare needs. We ultimately see that in the status quo, more and more people will use it for various reasons, and we see that telehealth is absolutely the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for judging.
Of course.
All right, Carlos, you're going to be next. Just let the judges finish their thoughts.
Over the time signals again, or are you all good?
Yeah, that would actually be really, really awesome. I'm gonna time myself, but like just in case my phone just turns off in the middle for some reason, then I'd prefer to have a backup.
Yeah, okay. So it's the regular 7-minute countdown.
Okay.
When we get to 1 minute, I'll show you one. I'll give
Okay.
you 30 seconds, 15, and then the last 5. And yeah, does that work for you, or do you have any other preferences?
Nope, that is super, super, super awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, then.
Y'all can hear me all right, by the way, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Cool.
Yeah, you're doing great.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot.
So I think all of us are going to turn off our mics while you're speaking now. Okay, have
Yeah.
fun.
All right. Thanks. Listen, I love Jeffree Star as much as the next person. And I also love Pharrell Williams and Ellen DeGeneres, even after her whole Bush scandal thing. But one thing that is very certain is that their presence on Twitter has only inspired a wave of hatred against them through the hashtag Guillotine 2020. That is hashtag Guillotine 2020. And part of the reason as to why it's been sparked up is because over the last couple of days and even weeks, it's shown that they have a disproportionate advantage over knowing whether they would have COVID-19 during the pandemic or not. This income inequality is nothing new. As the Pew Research Center on February 7th of this year explains, 61% of all Americans believe that income inequality is real. But most of them disagree as to how to solve it. The exigency of today is what brings us to the question that we're presented with that reads, what is the best way to address income inequality? This situation has gone really bad, really fast. And as the New York Times on March 30th of this year explains, now is the best time to solve income inequality through what they call the great equalizer of COVID-19. And we can address this through 3 different ways. First, by creating permanent solutions that put the essential back in essential worker. Second, by addressing racial disparities in income inequality before, finally, being comfortable with using the word oligarchy once again. First, in response to the breakout of COVID-19, Amazon sent letters to all of its warehouse workers thanking them for their service ahead of time and calling them heroes. This quick jump to calling them heroes without even so much as paying them a higher minimum wage is exactly why we need to talk about essential workers. So the first way that we can address income inequality is by putting the essential back in essential workers. Clearly, it's gone bad, especially for workers who are janitors, grocery workers, or even assisted living home workers. As one specific one, Yvette Beretta explains to the Brookings Institute on April 18th of this year, explaining that she only earns $11 an hour and that asking for a raise requires a process within itself and that she can't ask for a raise right now in the middle of a pandemic. But for others, it gets worse. Because The Nation on April 13th explains that lately healthcare workers have been fired for either requesting higher pay, hazard pay, or not showing up to work fearful of their lives. And it's not just healthcare workers, but also the very aforementioned Amazon warehouse workers. Alexa, play Wealth Inequality. As a New York magazine on April 22nd of this year explains that one worker who led protests in Staten Island, New York, Chris Smalls, was actually fired after organizing a protest of 300 Amazon workers, only requesting hazard pay. Now, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense back in the 1980s had requested economic self-determination, publishing a 10-point program asking for a variety of different things. But key to this was the idea that economic self-determination is also racial self-determination. So the second way that we can address income inequality is by realizing the racial disparities that currently exist today. As BBC on April 20th of this year explains, in Chicago, 72% of all people who had died of COVID-19 were all Black. Realizing that the problems that have been plaguing Black households for even just getting access to COVID tests are only being greatly exasperated in this situation right now. That Black households in 2018 were twice as likely to face food insecurity. And CNN on April 3rd of this year explains as well that when white America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. But this is also just as bad for other households as well, as Business Insider just today explains that the Trump administration is currently being sued because they denied stimulus checks not to immigrants, but to spouses of immigrants. The people like my father and my mother. My mom, who is a citizen, can get the stimulus check, but because she's married to my dad, we are getting just as much from the stimulus checks as Jeff Bezos has to pay in taxes. 0. It's all pretty grim, right? But Tom Hanks doesn't really seem to think so, because although he caught COVID-19, he managed to recover from it pretty fast. Not because he was healthy, but because he had access to the COVID-19 test. So clearly, as other people have also lauded him for it as well, he's not found a friend in anyone. So the final reason as to how we can address income inequality is by being comfortable, saying oligarchy. Salon on March 29th of this year explains that since 1980, we've seen gross amounts of income being hoarded up by the top 1%. Specifically, since the 1980s, the amount of wealth has quadrupled in the top 1% of people that currently own wealth. Specifically put into figures, that is 400 people who have 4% of wealth now, compared to the bottom half of people, 1.3%. That people like General Motors' CEO are still getting greater stimulus checks now, but still firing people. Or in the case, according to Mother Jones on April 4th of this year, CEO of Partners Healthcare is still getting $6 million a year, but just the other day denied hazard pay to essential healthcare workers. Clearly, this is bad, and at least getting comfortable with the nomenclature of saying oligarchy, owning up to it, and realizing that that's not the only epidemic that's plaguing us is essential to combating income inequality. Clearly, the first pandemic that has hit us pretty bad, but the pandemic that will come after this of income inequality will only be made worse, especially after asking today's question, what is the best way to address income inequality? And we combated this by going through 3 different reasons that we can create permanent measures to give more to essential workers. Second, by addressing racial disparities, and by being comfortable saying oligarchy. So I still like those people. I like the characters of Jeffree Star. I like the character of Pharrell Williams and Ellen DeGeneres. I like all of them. But in order for us to continue liking them, they have to do more than just flaunt their positive COVID-19 tests because they have access to them and the rest of us do not. So maybe when we go to the polls this year, the only name I'll be writing in on my ballot will be guillotine. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
All right, Brennan, you're up next. Wait for the judges to finish their thoughts.
All right, sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Brennan. So I will be trying to give you your time signals. Would you like me to go over them?
Sure.
Okay. So just basic 7-minute countdown. When we get to 1 minute, I'll show you that 1 minute. Give you 30 seconds, 40, what am I saying? 30 seconds, 15, and then the final 5.
Cool. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. According to the New York Times, on January 21st of 2019, there is violence in our streets. But it's not because of the ending of Game of Thrones or the fact that the cost of Legos has exponentially increased. That's more of just a personal problem. Because according to an economist, Louis Philip Beland from Louisiana State University, that extreme traffic found throughout most of the United States, especially in areas such as San Francisco and LA, actually correlates to higher rates of violence. That the longer someone is in traffic, the more likely they're found to be aggressive towards other drivers. And this violence can even spill over by using weapons or throwing things at other vehicles. And it brings me to the question today. Is now the time for big infrastructure reform? And the answer is yes. And there are 3 reasons why. First, America's infrastructure is failing. Second, that we could use the coronavirus to help our economy with infrastructure. And finally, its benefits to society. First, let's look at our infrastructure inside of the United States. According to the New York Times, on April 1st of this year, the first week of April was known as Infrastructure Week, where the American Society of Engineers releases their yearly report on the state of our infrastructure. And they gave us a whopping D-. Because according to Business Insider, in January of 2019, the American Society of Engineers argues that we will need $4.5 trillion in order to fix our infrastructure inside of the United States. And they also say that 200,000 bridges across the United States have not been retrofitted in the last 50 years. And they say that there are over 15,000 high hazard dams across the United States. And they give our rating of dealing with hazardous waste a D+. However, there is some good news. The way we deal with our drinking water is a solid D. That means a country where we fill up barrels full of toxic chemicals and literally bury them in the sand is doing a better job at that than we are with our drinking water and keeping it clean. So maybe don't drink the water the next time you're in the shower. Now that we've discussed how our infrastructure is failing, we'll now move to how we could use the coronavirus to help our economy. Because according to the EU Parliament, as of 2 weeks ago, they expect their unemployment to go up to 10.5% by the end of this year. And they're not alone. Because according to CNN, as of this morning, 26 million Americans are currently unemployed, which would translate to roughly a 13% unemployment rate. In response to these crises at home and abroad, leftist leaders such as Bernie Sanders, Noam Chomsky, and Keir Starmer, head of labor inside of Great Britain, all reported in that CNN article as of 2 days ago, are demanding a Green New Deal in their respective countries, which would spend trillions of dollars upgrading the infrastructure such as roads, broadband, and bridges, along with upgrading the general infrastructure of America to rely on more green energy sources, with the hopes that America's infrastructure could, actually work every once in a while. And along with that CNN article, they were also calling for large structural change, as if we can employ millions of Americans to go back to work once they've lost their jobs, it can help to restart the economy while also providing quality benefits for Americans everywhere. Speaking of quality benefits, it brings us to our third main point, which is the overall benefits to society, which, according to the Brookings Institute, on January 20th, 2015, increased broadband, roads, all help Americans. And considering the fact that my internet has been shoddy all day and my voice might be desynced from my volume, you might be asking for the next slide, please, on this slideshow, that the internet needs a serious upgrade inside of the United States. And along with our infrastructure, which a Green New Deal and large infrastructure reform packages cited earlier would help to increase. And according to AAA, on October of 2018, that every single year, $3 billion of damages are done to individuals just from potholes alone, meaning that the average American has to pay $300 every single year just to fix roadside issues that aren't usually their fault. And the issue is with this, that according to MarketWatch, on January 11th of 2020, that since 2/3 of Americans have less than $500 worth of savings in the bank and are living paycheck to paycheck, by having to go through these $300 expenditures, which are no fault of their own, it can seriously punish middle or lower income Americans, who often have to take time off of work at a low-paying job in order to wait for their car to get fixed that was broken by these potholes. And according to a study by Louisiana State University in 2019, we see that many Americans have high stress levels just from being in traffic. In fact, the average American would trade away 5 minutes of being at home if they could just sit in traffic for 1 minute less. As many Americans say, their key cause of stress is just being in traffic driving to and from work. And that's notable because the longer you sit in traffic, the more likely, according to that study, you're actually going to have heart disease and a variety of other ailments. Meaning that if we help infrastructure across the United States, we improve the longevity of Americans while also reducing their stress levels. So today, we've discussed the question, which is now the time for big infrastructure reform? And the answer is yes. And there are 3 reasons why. That first, our infrastructure is failing, that we have serious issues with the coronavirus and could use the infrastructure program to return Americans back to work. And finally, it gives strong benefits to society. And back to the economists at Louisiana State University. There is violence in America's streets, as in the last decade, we have had increased numbers of violence and road rage incidents, with many Americans becoming more frustrated with the state of our infrastructure across the United States. Now is the time to have real, meaningful change on infrastructure reform.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm Double Leonard. May I be excused to my next event?
Absolutely. Good luck.
Thank you.
Have fun.
All right, Ryan, you'll be next. Just wait for the judges to finish their thoughts.
Cool. Which one are you giving time signals? Awesome. Thank you. Oh, I think your mic's out.
You're muted. She's going to give you time signals, though. But, I mean, they're just the traditional ones, right?
Cool.
Is that all you needed to let them know? Yeah. And
yeah.
So she's showing you. You got it, right? I mean, everybody knows it at this point, right? Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Let's see. Give me 1 sec, and then I should be ready here. 5. All right. I'm good to go.
Me too.
All right. Thumbs up. Okay, cool. Make it happen.
Cool. Just a few days ago, Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman took to the news with Anderson Cooper to discuss her bold one-point plan for reinvigorating the U.S. economy. Reopen Las Vegas. I don't think I need a source to tell you why that's probably a pretty poor idea, but I genuinely believe that Mayor Goodman's heart is in the right place because she's looking to the future just a little bit too early. There is going to be a massive economic recession coming up after the coronavirus has passed through all of our bodies. And as The Atlantic points out on March 20th of 2020, it can be unlike anything any of us have ever been alive to see. Worse than the Great Depression, worse than the Great Recession. They're calling this a global economic ice age. Unprecedented. We need to adapt ourselves and create new strategies to reinvigorate the economy. So when we ask today's question, in an economic crisis, what should our nation focus on? The answer is a 3-part plan. First, to institute a universal basic income to ensure the survival of Americans. Second, to invest heavily in America's infrastructure. And finally, to invigorate the economy using aggregate demand increases through increasing the amount of money we're spending. So first, let's take a look at the most obvious solution to people not being able to afford things. Giving them money. As CNN points out, on April 11th of 2020, 1/3 of Americans in the month of March were unable to afford rent. And that's pretty concerning. Even though you can theoretically impose a rent freeze, as many places have done, you can't necessarily impose a freeze on things like paying for gas, food, or heating and electricity. So there's a lot that simple regulation can't solve for. But what you can solve for is just giving people money. Andrew Yang made a name for himself in the last presidential campaign when he advocated giving every American $1,000 a month, but right now that's getting a lot of bipartisan support. As Newsweek points out just 2 days ago, there's a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. Take, for instance, very conservative Tea Party member Justin Amash. He has voted for a balanced budget amendment every single session that he's been in Congress, but even still, he's calling for $2,000 a month to every single American, regardless of income level, until the coronavirus outbreak is over. There is broad bipartisan support for such a plan, and it would ensure that every American has the basic money necessary to survive. The common quip that most people have with universal basic income is that it would raise inflation. You give people money and businesses would just raise the prices of their goods so that nothing really changes. However, studies have shown that's not exactly the case. Vox on September 20th of 2017 points out that a mild UBI during normal economic times doesn't cause any inflation. But right now, these are not normal times. And if you were to institute a massive universal basic income, you very well might see inflation, which is a good thing because we're currently experiencing monetary deflation. Universal basic income ensures the long-term survival of American citizens and is absolutely necessary to getting the economy back on track. Another thing that the United States government needs to do in order to reinvigorate the economy is to increase demand through increased spending. The St. Louis Fed on March 25th of 2020 points out that the coronavirus has instituted a supply shock and a demand shock. Businesses aren't producing things and people aren't buying things. This has contracted the overall size of the economy. And the only way to solve for this, as famed economist Paul Krugman points out, is to spend exorbitant sums of money. In his July 28th, 2010 blog about the Great Recession, he points out that the $800 billion allocated by Congress to solve for the Great Recession wasn't enough. Not nearly even close. It not only went to the wrong places, but it just wasn't enough to get the economy stimulated enough to where it could actually function on its own. He recommends something more along the lines of $1.3 to $1.7 trillion. If we were to institute this policy and inject more money into the economy than Congress already has, we would see a quick recovery period. However, another and possibly most important thing that the United States government can do to reinvigorate the economy and solve for an economic crisis is simply to invest in America's infrastructure. As the 2017 infrastructure report points out, the United States gets a D+ rating for their infrastructure. It's pretty abysmal. Roads are falling apart, bridges are falling apart, and most importantly, we don't have things like a green energy grid or mass public transportation in most places. So what can we do to both get people back to work when demand is low and improve our infrastructure? Institute massive government infrastructure projects. I'm sure you've all heard of the Hoover Dam on the Las Vegas-Arizona border. That was a result of 1930s infrastructure development, which put people to work then, is still putting people to work today, and as NBC News on March 30th points out, can actually cause massive amounts of people to get an even greater effect from the multiplier. When you invest in America's infrastructure, you don't just put people back to work, you also get benefits out of it that you wouldn't get from just a normal economic stimulus. You get things like a green energy grid, which we desperately need in these times of climate change. You get things that are even more important than that, like public transportation, simply getting people to work. These are really, really important because, again, as NBC News points out, American unemployment is bound to reach up to 32%, according to recent Fed estimates. This is really, really concerning because if people can't get to work in the private sector, they need to be employed in the public sector. So Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman has a bold economic strategy, but her strategy, while it's really bad for right now, would be really good in the future. We do need to reopen the economy at some point, and the best way to do this is to, number one, ensure that Americans have enough money in their pockets through a universal income program. Second, you need to ensure that aggregate demand increases through massive amounts of government stimulus spending. And finally, you need to put that stimulus spending in a place that matters, America's infrastructure. We can come out of this stronger than we were beforehand. All it takes is Congress to pull their heads out of their rear ends.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next we have Kate.
Super, I am here.
All right, you're up next. We'll just wait for the judges to finish their thoughts.
Sounds good.
Kate, you want to speak for us again? Let's hear your audio.
Can you hear me? I was having trouble with it earlier. Do I sound like a robot?
Yeah, it's fine. Obviously, we totally recognize that there's challenges.
Do you want me to try it? Hang on, let me try it without my headphones because it worked better
Okay.
earlier round.
Okay.
It's better.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
definitely hear you better. I
Perfect.
mean, we would have been yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what it sounded like. I don't know what it sounded like you were. You know what? It sounded like you were talking through about like 4 fans, if that was
Oh.
possible. Yeah. So in a
It's
way, so
guys,
it sounded neat, but not necessarily good for Extemp. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'll turn my camera back on because I thought maybe it was a bandwidth issue. So
Oh no, here we are.
I'm ready, by the way.
Perfect.
Me too.
And then Judge Flores Garcia, you're giving hand signals, correct? Okay, perfect. And this will just be standard 5 down, 30, 15. Okay, I was watching the last round, just making sure. Perfect. She can see me. All ready?
Yeah.
In the midst of World War II, the message that seemed to be going around the world was pretty simple. Keep calm and carry on. A pretty simple motto that citizens around the world were instructed in a time of massive chaos and terror. Just carry on your daily lives so that you aren't feeling like they've been disrupted by the world around you. See, this was a great idea in World War II, but when we look at the war the United States is fighting today, the war on COVID-19, the idea of keep calm and carry on doesn't work at all. Because while we may need to keep calm, carrying on our daily lives is the opposite of what needs to be happening. In a global world where the best thing to do is uproot our entire social systems, we see that the federal government needs to step in to make a dramatic difference in the way the crisis is being handled. Now, this leads us to the question that I was given today. Did the latest coronavirus relief package do enough? And to this, I answer no. The relief package, passed on April 21st, 2020, according to an NPR article, did provide significant funding. Specifically, significant funding in the form of $321 billion in small business loans, $60 billion in small business disaster relief grants, $75 billion in additional funding for hospitals, and $25 billion additional dollars in testing. But the 3 key reasons that this was not enough in the last stimulus bill is because, first, it does not directly and does not help enough of low-income, at-risk populations. Second, it doesn't do enough to supplement testing. And finally, it leaves our United States Postal Service high and dry. Now, let's first begin with the fact that this latest wave of coronavirus stimulus package leaves at-risk populations at a significant disadvantage, even as we've continued to push these stimulus bills forward. According to a KFF.org article published April 24th, 2020, one of the main problems is that in the last stimulus bill, passed just a week ago, it provided $400 million for the IHS, the Indian Health Services, which primarily provides health services for American Indians and Alaskan Natives. But the problem is there was already an existing infrastructure issue within the IHS, that its care was spotty at best and wasn't able to serve all of those who relied on it. The additional funding that's been put into the program wasn't enough to fix the program before the COVID-19 crisis. Better off now that we're having an entire global pandemic that requires the response of an entire nation. In addition, Black and minority business owners are also being left high and dry in the latest wave of coronavirus funding. According to the Brookings Institute on April 14th, 2020, we see that if we look back to the Great Recession in 2008, from the period of 2008 to 2011, 60% of white-owned businesses recovered and survived, but only 49% of proportionally managed and similar industries for Black business owners survived at only a rate of 49%. Now, going forward to a Washington Post article from April 24th, 2020, we see the fact that minority business owners are more likely to be vulnerable to economic devastation, and that the latest wave doesn't provide any kind of prioritized funding for groups that are at the most risk of losing their businesses.
Now, second, let's look at the fact that now we've addressed there's already issues in what's happened in stimulated funding. Let's talk about one of the funding parts of this package that barely even passed and isn't doing enough: testing. According to Vox's Recode podcast on April 24th, 2020, the latest wave provided $25 billion in additional funding for testing resources, but there was no mechanism for distribution included in the package. And this is because the Republicans and our President Donald Trump didn't actually want additional resources to go toward testing. According to Business Insider's March 12th article in 2020, chronicles the issues in testing funding that the government has been facing. Specifically, the history of the battle shows that the federal government and the president refused to were very hesitant to pass this bill because they felt that the funding was, and I quote from President Trump, relating to unrelated issues. In an Atlantic article from March 31st, 2020, we also see that testing alone can no longer flatten the curve. We have gone too far. And what actually needs to happen is we need to have a testing scheme to the likes of Germany and South Korea that's testing an approximate of 1 million people per week, which we can't fund now, and we definitely won't be able to fund even with this small uptick in funding. The $25 billion addition in the stimulus bill is simply not enough, which is just another reason to show why, in fact, this stimulus bill has not done enough. Now, let's finally talk about the fact that this latest wave of coronavirus relief is about to leave one of our most important and beloved institutions, the United States Postal Service, high and dry. According to the United States Postal Service.com, they employ around 500,000 employees. Incredibly important jobs, especially when we're heading into an economic downturn. Now, even more than that, the United States Postal Service carries approximately 48% of the world's mail. So, the United States Postal Service going down in economic, fiery, sad, letter-reluted frames would be a terrible global decision. Now, in addition, looking at a Washington Post article from April 11th, 2020, we see that Trump threatened to veto the CARES Act if it had any kind of funding for the post office inside of it, which is why the post office has been left completely out of stimulus bills meant to save businesses and meant to save institutions that are going to be hardest hit by the coronavirus. Now, we can also see that according to Fortune's article on March 30th, 2020, it is important to save the post office for several key reasons. First, they deliver 1 million life-saving medications through their mail each year, which are important in a time that we need life-saving medications, vaccines, and testing kits processed and sent out throughout the United States. They are also the only mail service provider for America's rural areas. In addition, the 2020 census and the government's elective vote-by-mail system would not be able to happen and would not be economically feasible without the government institutionalized U.S. Postal Service. And if it goes down, so could our democracy. Now, what we see today is we took a look at the question, did the latest coronavirus relief package do enough? And we answered no for 3 key reasons. First, it has continued to leave out at-risk populations. Second, it does not do enough to bolster testing. And finally, the fact that it leaves the U.S. Postal Service dry. When we talk about keep calm and carry on, we do need to keep calm. But carrying on with the stimulus packages that we already have is just not the right answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, lastly, we'll have Daniela. All right, you're our last speaker. Just wait for the judges to finish their thoughts.
Mhm.
All right, I'm good to go.
Me too.
Okay, are we all good? Okay. Maria Rivera is a small business owner located in Santa Ana, California, but she is also undocumented. She explains that it has been difficult to pay the bills, especially in the middle of a pandemic. But when she heard that the federal government was helping people, she got really excited. However, at the end, she realized that the federal bill did not cover undocumented immigrants. California has been trying to fix this issue and recently has made a plan stating that undocumented immigrants will be able to actually have some relief when it comes to the pandemic. However, many people do not support this. In an article by LA Times, April 23rd, explains that the Center for American Liberty has actually tried to stop this bill from happening. Governor Gavin Newsom has explained that he is going to allocate $75 million for undocumented immigrants to be able to have a good life within the coronavirus pandemic. However, this makes us ask this important question. Will the Center for American Liberty succeed in stopping California's plan to provide aid for undocumented immigrants? And the answer is absolutely not, because the undocumented community has been able to garner support in California. But specifically for three key reasons. First, how political leaders have actively collaborated to help undocumented immigrants. Second, how the Center for American Liberty has had a lack of strong leadership. And lastly, how the undocumented community is continuing to fight back. But first, let's look into how political leaders have collaborated when it comes to this issue. California is 65% Hispanic and Latin community. What this means is that many people are actively engaging with the conversation on the undocumented community, and also many of its political leaders. In an article by USA Today, April 15, it explains that Governor Gavin Newsom has collaborated with leaders and nonprofits to create this plan. He states that this is not just the work of one man, but rather the whole state. He explains that he is grateful that the state of California has continued to fight back against the injustices that undocumented community is facing. But not only is Governor Gavin Newsom actually in support of this, but also other political leaders. In an article by The Independent, April 16, it explains that 62% of political leaders and state representatives have actually voted for this bill. What this is showing is that only a small minority of people do not agree with this bill. The Center for American Liberty is going to have a hard time to stop this bill because it has gained the attention and the support of many political leaders. So therefore, their fight is going to be an uphill battle that might not even have the results that they wanted. But second, let's look into how they have a lack of strong leadership. When a nonprofit such as Center for American Liberty wants to be successful, they must be able to have good lawyers and good money. However, when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, not many nonprofits have been able to garner much monetary funds. In an article by CBS News, April 21st, explains that the Center for American Liberty has seen a drop when it comes to its funds. During the month of March, they lost around 32% of the funds that they have because many of the donors did not even have money to donate to the organization. What this is showing is that the Center for American Liberty does not have any money. So therefore, they're not going to have any resources to be able to go through this settlement and stop this plan to happen. But additionally, many analysts have criticized their opinion and their choice to go against this bill. In an article by NBC News, April 16, many organizers and activists that work for the Center for American Liberty have explained that this is going to be an uphill battle. What they mean is that many people are not going to agree with this issue. Even though the state of California is the one dealing with this issue, the United States is actually actively engaging with the conversation when it comes to undocumented community. Critics have stated that the Center for American Liberty is going to gonna need more money to be able to fight against a battle that many people are fighting for. The Center for American Liberty does not have the money, so therefore they won't be able to pay good lawyers. Additionally, Governor Gavin Newsom has stated that he's going to do everything to fight back against this nonprofit organization. Additionally, he has stated that he has recruited volunteer attorneys to fight back against this nonprofit. This is showing that the Center for American Liberty is not going to be successful because they are not able to find the resources to fund this fight. But lastly, let's look into how the undocumented community continues to fight back. Even though they face many challenges, they are actively speaking out against these issues that are discriminating them. In an article by ABC, April 5th, explains that 10% of undocumented workers work in the agricultural field. They explained that when they found out that they were not going to receive any funding, they decided to not go to work. Political leaders and activists have actually engaged with the conversation because they have engaged in a strike and a protest against the unfair injustices that they are facing. Additionally, in an article by Politico, April 23rd, explains that nonprofits such as the California Dream Team has garnered money to join the fight against the Center for American Liberty. The undocumented community in California is not giving up, giving Center for American Liberty an even harder fight to fight. So returning to today's question, will the Center for American Liberty succeed in stopping California's plan to provide aid for undocumented immigrants? And the answer is absolutely not, because the undocumented community has been able to gain support in California, but specifically for three key reasons. First, how political leaders have actively collaborated against the injustices for undocumented communities. Second, how the Center for American Leadership has seen a lack of leadership and funds throughout this coronavirus pandemic. And lastly, how the undocumented community has continued to fight back. Even though Maria Rivera has seen a loss of funds and a loss of opportunities, she explains that this is going to continue to be important and that the fight must continue to go on.
Thank you.
Congrats, everyone.
Yeah, congratulations, everyone.
Great job, everyone. And that concludes our round. Awesome.
All right, later, y'all.
Later.